Hey, what's up, Josh? How you been?
Hey man, I've been good. Just staying at it, working hard, living the
Yeah,
dream.
it's good, and you're working hard on comics, which is
I
always
am.
great and inspiring. And so tell us about your newest project, which is on Indiegogo right now, Biophile Kolga.
All right. So Biophile Kolga is the second actual title in our Godfoe universe. The first was called Apollyon 20XX. That came out January. It's like 100 and right at 180 pages. Came out in
Mhm.
January, and that's set way back at the beginning of our timeline. Kolga is set about 1,000 years after that. It's connected. It is in the same world, but it you can read Kolga without having read that. You can read that without having read Kolga. They're self-contained but connected. So Kolga, where our first book was more of an Akira meets X-Men kind of action superhero-ish kind of story. Kolga is a lot more of a, I would say, a pulpy type of character. Like it's got a lot of horror, it's got a lot of adventure type action in it. Uh, Probably more anime inspired. Particularly, it's full color. It's really bright and colorful, and we tried to lean into that. Um, but I mean, it's a story of a heretic, a woman who has stood against the powers that be her entire life, and that's been a long life. And she starts the story as a person who thinks she's on her last mission, and then gets a young body and a whole new life. And from that point on, it's about this angry, bitter old woman and a new young body who's wants to basically burn it all down.
And sort of like before we jumped on, you're talking about working hard. Like, what's it like, sort of jumping from one book to the next, especially something like 20XX, which was like a huge project. 100 and something pages. That's not something to be taken lightly, especially when it comes to comics. So, what was it like to sort of go from that, even though they're set in the same universe, and I'm sure there's some things that jump in, but I know putting a comic together and a campaign is not easy. So, what was it like, sort of going from that into this?
Well, I learned a lot on Apollyon as far as just the process of how to streamline and not have to keep doing a bunch of reformatting and then saving it five different kinds of ways in a bunch of different places. Like I learned by the time we got to Colga, I was moving a lot faster. Like my process is a lot faster. And our logistics for how Dan and I, who is Dan's the writer, I'm the artist, our back and forth and our editing process is so much smoother now. So we have a system that really works well for us now. The biggest jump for me was Apollyon's black and white. So the shift from a black and white book to a very, very colorful, full color book, um, it was actually nice for me because it's easier, I think, to shift gears when it's a completely different kind of approach and a completely different feel to it. It made it easier to just say, okay, I'm gonna put my Colga hat on, and this is where I'm working on, and kind of, and then when I finished Colga, which is when it comes out, it's going to be 100 pages. There's a few like additional things in and out of it, so it's going to be 100 pages. I finished that last page, and then the next day I was working on volume two of Apollyon, and the same thing was true. Like getting to shift back from that into this gritty, dark dystopian thing. Like it just the fact that they're so tonally different made it easier for me to go back and forth because it feels like playing in a completely different sandbox. And it's been so much fun.
Yeah, and you launched a couple days ago on Indiegogo, and what's it been like to sort of see the response? I think what's really cool about seeing creators that use the crowdfunding route is that a lot of times their funders and audience sort of follows them around, and to the next
Yeah.
book and the next book. So what's it been like to see the response from previous readers and also potentially new ones, because now you've completely shifted gears, even though it's set in the same universe. As you said, it's totally completely different.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary for us, just because we knew that we loved it, and like we felt like it was really great, but at the same time, it's a harder sell. I think the horror elements is not everybody's cup of tea. it was easy to sell Apollyon as being more of a manga in some ways because of its the black and white format, so people respond to that. But our early reviews, the people who have read Kolga have absolutely loved it. Like it's blowing people away. They love the characters, they love the art, they love the colors. And as far as the crowdfunding, it started off a little slow, which a lot of there can be a thousand reasons for why it takes a while for people to see it or for people to get that paycheck and be able.
Mm,
I've had several people that I know are like, I can't wait to get this, I just can't get it right now.
mm,
But as we get more eyes on it, I think it's going to really pick up. The one thing I will say is, like, our last signing that we did and the last time we were at a convention, we had the first chapter of Kolga printed out and in a binder so people could look at it.
yeah.
And every person that came to our table looked at that and said, I can't wait for this to come out. And along with that, we've also got a video game, which is about 75% finished. It's a prequel to Kolga. And when we do cons and signings and things, we're able to have a monitor and a controller so people can play the demo of the game.
Mm,
And that's been a really good interaction for people too. They're like, oh man, this is really fun. And then there's a story and all. So I think that the biggest thing with Kolga is it's a completely original character and a completely original world. We're not dropping people in our world. It's a totally different world. I think it's a little bit of a harder sell than, well, here's another Deadpool book that it's just
mm,
like the last Deadpool book. Like you're asking people to dive into something completely fresh. And if you're a book reader, if you're a novel reader, that's not that hard. We do that all the time. But if you're just a book reader, that's not always the easiest like sell for people. Um, but I think once you get a chance to get into Colga, I think people are loving it. And I know we're going to hit our goal. We're going to surpass our goal, and we're going to get it out to people as soon as possible. I'm excited.
so and I think what you said, it sort of rings true. And even me as a comic book reader, I find myself taking more chances like on a new manga, like because the covers are
Hmm.
so interesting and you're kind of like, all right, like this is $8 to $10, I could get this full story and I get to dive into the world. Whereas I think sometimes, particularly with comics, you're like, well, this is $5, this is 20 pages. And if I don't like this taste, it's hard to commit, and also to remember, hey, is this on a monthly schedule, a bi-monthly schedule?
Hmm.
So I think just like sort of the logistics of it. So sort of having that approach of being like, all right, we're going to give you 100 pages gives people that sort of like commitment to be like, all right, for this 10, $15, I get to dive into this world, get a complete story, hopefully,
Yep. Yep.
and get to engage in a different way than whereas with I think floppies sometimes could be that struggle. Like yes,
Well,
sometimes you
and
get that one first issue that you're like,
yeah,
great. But sometimes you're like, man, that was $5. I could have, bought another Batman book and at least been
yeah.
happy with it.
Yeah, and I think that with
Yeah.
indie stuff in particular, the floppies for indie is scary because then you're like, what if I like this and then it's 2 years before I get issue two, or what if
Yeah.
I never get issue two, or and I think that's one of the things that Dan and I have said from the beginning is like it doesn't even really matter how successful we are, and I know that sounds like a stupid thing to say, but
Yeah.
like we're gonna keep putting this stuff out regardless because it keeps us sane and it keeps us alive.
Yeah.
Creating keeps us alive, but we have at least 6 volumes of Kolga planned, completely written, like all the way mapped out. Same thing with Apollyon. So, like, our goal is every spring you get a new volume of Apollyon, every fall or summer you get a new volume of Kolga, and that's going to be kind of the way it goes. And once we build a bigger platform, if I can bring more artists on board, we got all these little things in the timeline that are the ideas are there. It's all mapped out. We just need more people that can come in and take over art because I can't do all of it. But I think it's a matter of like if you earn their trust by giving them a good complete story and delivering it on time, and then you do the next thing too, that's when you start building good faith with the indie people. The fact that we've put out, when Kolga comes out, we'll have put out like almost 300 pages worth of material in 1 year. I mean, that's pretty good for an indie group.
No, that's awesome and amazing. And sort of I think crowdfunding and indie creators sort of take on, like, yes, you get the benefit of being like, this is mine, this is my world, I have creative control. But also there is the stress of that, the stress of being like, hey, Batman, DC, Marvel is not the brand that sort of takes, the arrows. You are. So if you're
Yeah,
late,
yeah,
you don't deliver something, you
yeah. There's
promise
nobody to
like better
blame it on but
quality.
me.
Yeah, exactly. So you're taking that, and I think that sometimes is exciting, but it could also be stressful.
Yeah.
And something that's been really cool about doing the podcast is learning that side of things. We've had, a
Hmm.
couple indie creators, and sort of like, it's like, yeah, this is great, but also printing's hell. This is like,
Yeah.
you sort of learn like the logistics of it and how challenging it could be. But
Well,
like,
and I'm very fortunate in that Dan and I are a really good team, and he scripts everything out. We create everything together, like the story we all create together, and then he scripts it out, and he's always on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the
yeah,
next thing. I do all the art, so I'm doing all the pencils, all the inks, all the color, all the lettering, which that's a lot of work. Although I enjoy it, but I think about a lot of these people who, like, they've just got a really good idea and they really want to make a comic, and they know they have to do it indie because that's their only option. But then they're paying like five different people to make that comic
yeah,
happen, and they're paying, like, some of them are trying to, for their campaign, they're paying like three or four artists to do like variant covers.
yeah,
So you're paying this dude $2,000 to do a cover for you, and you're paying this other guy to draw it, and another guy to ink it, and another person to color. And like, it's frustrating. I know for a lot of people, they have to charge so much for 22 pages because they had to pay six people to make it happen.
yeah,
With Dan and
you
I, it's
know,
just the two of us, and we're
yeah,
any whatever money we do make off of it goes right back into the next thing. So like, we're not paying ourselves right now. We're building the platform and aiming towards 10, 15, 20 years from now. You
yeah.
know.
And I think that's why sort of people sort of gravitate towards indie, just because in a lot of ways you kind of have to do it for the love of the game. Because
Yeah, because
I
you're
think
not going to
it's
make money off of it at first,
yeah, at
unless
best
you
you're
got
breaking
somebody that
even.
got fired from Marvel working for you. You're
Yeah.
probably, you
I mean,
got to make a name.
even
Yeah,
then,
even then.
I've talked to creators who've had even a publisher on their campaign, and there's still all that struggle of being like, all right, like, and then like you said, there's also, you're dealing with a lot more personalities, whereas like you and Dan could be locked in, each
Yep.
other, the way each other works and stuff. But with some things you're like, well, I got this editor, I got this letterer, we paid this guy to do this, he's late.
He's late.
It's like, because he's late I look like that, so there's a
Hmm.
lot of that. And but when it does work, I think people gain a following and they're able to be like, like, maybe Kolga's not necessarily something I'm into because I'm not into horror, but hey, like, Josh, I remember that last comic I got, like, I'm gonna invest in them. And that sort of like is the other side of that coin of taking those arrows. It's like, hey,
Hmm.
like, people sometimes, especially with those indie campaigns, are like, I'm investing in the creator. Sometimes I don't even have to
Yeah.
look. It's like, hey, if I see sort of he's got a new campaign going on, I'm gonna immediately back it.
Well, and the good thing about Kolga, I know I'm selling it from the horror
Yeah.
elements, but it's also, it's a character study. It's got humor in it. It's got lighter moments. It's not all like, it's not really a terrifying book. It
Yeah.
has some scary moments. It's got some scary characters in it, but like, I think it's a book that could appeal to a wide range of people. If you like strong female leads, you get two of them in this book.
Yeah.
It's not all dark and dreary, and it's actually really, it's funny for it to be, have a darker story. It's really bright. Like, so I think it balances well.
Yeah, and I think it's the right time for it too, just because there is a bit of, I think horror comics in general are those are kind of things I'm picking up lately, just because I feel like they're sort of the ones that have the highest concept these days.
Mm.
One thing I've been reading lately, I mean, even though this is on like a larger scale, but like I really love Creature from the Black Lagoon. It was like really like, yeah,
I've enjoyed those issues too. It's been an
yeah.
interesting take on it.
Yeah, which was, it was kind of like Nightbreed, it's like,
Yep.
so like it had those elements, and I was like, oh, that's a really interesting like way to do it. They'd
Hmm.
probably never make a movie like that. Or, some of the stuff Scott Snyder's done on the indie realm the past couple of years, like Night of the Ghoul, and then
Hmm.
like recently like with White Boat and stuff. So I think it's a really interesting and exciting time with that. And then also in other media, you look at like some of the most successful films of the year are just horror films. You look at
Yep.
Longlegs, and there's a
Hmm.
couple others where it's like, hey, like I think people see horror and it's a genre where they're like they actively have to engage in. And it's one of those things where people go into, it's like, all right, prove it. Scare me,
Yeah.
or like show me
Yeah.
something
Or give
horrific
me
and
a really
cool.
good time, like do something
Yeah.
I haven't seen before. And I think too, and you bring up horror being, kind of coming back into
Mhm.
vogue again, but all of the times when horror has had these big resurgences, it's always been times when, like, politically and in terms of like the world globally and
Mhm.
and here in the states, when things are unsettled and people are nervous about the future and people are a little scared about what's going on, and that's when horror always kind of ramps it up,
Yeah.
because that's how we can help have a healthy outlet to deal with that stress and that anxiety we're carrying about the world around us. Horror is a good outlet for that. And so it becomes, kind of how we process all the stuff we can't control about the future right now and the present.
Yeah. And talking about the future, and you've kind of touched on it with the Kolga game, and sort of like the future you have mapped out with Dan. So like after this campaign, like what's next for Kolga? You talked about sort of like the obviously the Godfoe universe you've got going on, but particularly for this story and this character, what can fans expect?
I don't want to give away too much. I will say that this, if you read the first volume, you're going to meet there's really three main characters. Kolga, of course, she's the title character, but then she has a girl named June who is sort of her sidekick ward. There's daughter energy between, like, mother daughter energy there, and there's definitely female conflict between them, but there's love and affection too. And then there's a character named Stu who is a magic eyeball that floats in a lantern, and
Yeah.
he's funny and goofy until he's not. He's funny right up until he's scary. And one of the things that people who have already read the book, early advanced like review copies of the book, have says that they love the characters. They want to know more about June. They want to know more about Stu. We really only give you hints at those characters in this first volume. Volume two is definitely going to unpack their backgrounds a lot more, who they are, what they are, where they're from, what they're capable of. So that's not to say that Kolga takes a back seat in volume two, but those other characters are going to come to the foreground. Um, volume two is going to have a lot more of a shuffling of the board of who's in control of things, and it's a little bit of an Empire Strikes Back in a way, in that the heroes are sort of going to be on the run, it, to to put it in a way that doesn't give away too much. Later on, and this is like we're talking like volume three or four, we're going to do a tournament arc, because like
Yeah.
we're big like manga anime nuts. So
Yeah, you got to do a tournament.
we found a really fun excuse to do an entire arc that's going to be a tournament. And I'm not giving away anything about that, but we got some really awesome characters that we'll get to meet when we finally reach that point. I think getting to play in these different genres that we love so much, Kolga lets us do a little bit of all of that in a way that's justified. So, and it's hopefully a new take on it that nobody's really seen before. So, that's kind of where she's headed next.
No, and I think what's been really inspiring about talking to you is just like the work ethic. Like I don't know how many pages you're pumping out a day, but like to get like to 102 books in a couple years is pretty nuts.
Well, and I've said this on some other shows. I was a classroom teacher, elementary art for 17 years. And a little over a year ago, I got to the end of my school year and I just knew like I'm about to be 40 and I
Mm,
am 40 now. I'm about to be
mm, yeah,
41 next month.
yeah,
But like when I was staring down the barrel at 40, I'm like, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. And I put in my resignation and I stepped away from the classroom and I started like just really knuckling down and I finished Apollyon and immediately ran into working on Kolga and I'm working on other comics for different people, kind of on the side. And I am doing other work. That's not the
yeah,
comics aren't the only work I do, but I
yeah,
do spend a good 3-4 hours a day every day drawing. And honestly, like even on vacation, I'm drawing like I really do. It's a huge chunk of my day every day, but I love doing it. I haven't had a day yet when I felt like I don't feel like drawing this today. Like especially when it's my stuff. Like drawing other people's characters and other people's story is fine and that pays a bill, that the money spends, but like when I get to work on Kolga, when I get to work on Apollyon, when I get to work on our stuff, man, it never feels like work.
yeah. That's awesome. And is there any advice you'd give any crowdfunding creators or indie creators? Like obviously you made that huge leap after, a certain point in your career, but is there any advice now that you've been sort of like a year or two into being a creator? Is there anything you'd give advice?
I think a big piece of it is, you know, if you're not sold on yourself, you're not going to sell anybody else on you. Like if you don't believe you can do it, if you're not convinced, and if you're not dedicated enough to invest in yourself, then you're never going to convince somebody else to invest in you. So I would say that like you have to be willing. I'm not saying everybody needs to quit their job or
Mhm.
take the same path I did, but you do have to be willing to say I'm gonna set aside whatever I need to make the time to do this because if I'm not going to work on it, nobody's going to work on it for me. Um, I think it's really important who you choose to work with. There's a compatibility, and it doesn't always have to be about that you get along, that you're best friends or anything like that, but you need to be able to communicate with the people you're working with and have dependable people. And I would say, in my experience, keeping that circle as small as possible is the best way to control it. Um, and like I said, Dan and I have a system that works, and it's just the two of us. So it doesn't. There's not all these other moving parts. I would say is you know, before I would pay 5 people to do my art, I'd find one guy that's willing and able to do all of it and just pay that guy more.
Yeah.
Like if that's the situation, like I wouldn't say, oh, don't I wouldn't hire 3, 4, 5 people to work on a book. Like keep the circle as small as possible. When you grow to a point that you can afford to hire that many people, go for it. But if you're just getting started, keep the circle as small as possible. Work on it every single day, and you've got to shove it in people's faces. You got to push. You got to reach out, message people 100 times, and even if they don't message you back, you keep messaging. You keep sharing it every day. You've got to. That's the challenge. We're the little guys, so we got to get it in front of people. Like I know that it's good. I know when people read it, they'll like it. But if they don't ever see it, they don't ever have a chance to like it. So I think that's kind of you got to be your hardest worker. Like you got to be your biggest cheerleader, your biggest, you're the megaphone. You got to, and that for a lot of people that feels weird. Like it feels like I don't like to put myself out there. That's the only way you're going to get attention is if you get it. You got to put it in front of people. You can't just sit back. I've seen some work from indie guys that is like the artwork or the story are phenomenal, and they sell 10 copies. And you look at it, you're like, how is it possible? Because this is so good. It can be the best art that's ever. It could be the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but if nobody sees it, you're not going to sell it. And that's the tough part of indie is like we're uphill walking, like we are pedaling against a current, and you to stand out, you've got to work hard. You got to be as original as possible.
Yeah. And I think you're really sort of, living your advice, walking the
I'm
walk.
trying, man.
Yeah.
I'm trying so hard.
And
So
where
I
can people support you and then also Koga? Now that the campaign is going, so where in social channel can people follow you?
all right.
And then also where they can support Koga.
All right. So I mean, the easiest place to go to get the most information is always www.godfoeuniverse.com. That's our main hub. If you look up Biophile Kolga, or even just put in Kolga, you can find us on Indiegogo with the new campaign. We also have a tier in that campaign where, like, if you didn't read Apollyon and you realize now, oh, they had another book and Kolga, for $35, you can get Kolga and Apollyon 20XX Volume 1. You get both of those for $35, and we do $5 shipping, flat shipping rate. So you're getting 178 pages and then another 90 pages with Kolga for $35. That's pretty good. Um, we're on all social media, so you can find us on. I'm still trying to teach myself not to say Twitter. It's X now.
Yeah.
X gonna
Well,
give it to you.
everyone calls it Twitter, so call it
Yeah,
Twitter.
yeah.
It's like
So we
I,
are.
you,
We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, like we're on YouTube. Just look at Godfoe Universe. We're easy to find. We finally managed to be enough in the algorithm that we come up quick.
and with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.